Thank you very much for the invitation and being able to participate in this important event. Sorry. I'm going to talk about the maritime or the cultural coastal landscape of Yap and its connection with marine ecological conservation. So where is Yap? Yap is in the Northwest Pacific, and I put here a map showing its context with the Austronesian migration out of Taiwan about 5,000 years ago. In the top right-hand side, you'll see Yap bounded by this red line. This represents the Federated States of Micronesia, and Yap is one of the 4 states. I'm going to talk particularly about the small volcanic island, which has a coastline of about 100 kilometres long. The Yap state comprises many coralline islands, which extend for about 400 or 500 kilometres towards Chuuk. So it's part of the Micronesia. There's 5 countries associated with Micronesia, but Yap is part of the Federated States of Micronesia, one of the independent nations in Micronesia. You can see the others there associated with Polynesia, Melanesia. So I'd like to start off with talking about, this is my favourite subject, essentially, this context with the Fishwings with Austronesian cultural heritage and identity. And I put here a list of what's recognisable, some of the features and the language, the dwellings, the peat pottery. And I like to see that, I like to always put forward how fishing and the Fishwings, which extend right across this Austronesian area in the Pacific and Oceania, is an important part of the heritage and identity. As Peter Bellwood mentioned, sorry about that. Peter Bellwood mentioned in his reason for why Austronesians moved out of the Taiwan was because looking for favourable environments for cultivation and sheltered inshore fishing. And so Fishwings, fishing practices, the intangible cultural heritage are an important part, and they should be recognised more. And I like to put it forward that they should be recognised as an important part of the cultural heritage and identity of Austronesians. So Austronesians were therefore very accomplished seafarers. They established trade and tribute networks throughout the whole of Oceania. And the Yapese were similarly a part of this. They established a good trade network through their outer islanders, and also with Palau, where they quarried these stone money discs. About 13,000 now of these stone money discs in Yap. So they were quarried from about 600 years ago up until the 1930s. And they transported them in traditional canoe and raft for 450 kilometres from Palau to Yap. They have a very strong connection with their, they want to maintain a strong connection with their culture and history, and they do this through a number of things. One of them is through dancing and chanting, where they use dance and chants to commemorate events and their ancestors. Here's a stick dance with the young people out front of a stone money bank. And I was in Yap for a number of months and saw many impromptu chants like the older men here did one night time. So let's move on to the Fishwings. So this is the high volcanic island area where the Fishwings are. The green represents the 4 islands, volcanic islands. And you can see the white area surrounding the islands. That's the reef flat. The blue dots represent about 450 of these Fishwings, and you can see an example of one of them there. So it's an excellent area for these tidal Fishwings, and I'll get on to how they work. But just to introduce, there are 420 species of fish and about 168 species of hard coral in Yap waters. There are many traditional cultural practices associated with the Fishwing practice, starting with the fact that the Yapese say that the spirits that came to Yap and roamed around Yap in the form of men. 7 of the early fish weirs were built by spirits that were in the form of men. One of us in the form of an eel. And they showed the Yappies how to build these fish weirs, to build them so they would be sustainable, and also to build them so that they would catch fish in a sustainable manner over a long period of time. So they had a connection with the marine environment, the marine ecology, right from the beginning, from the sort of time of the spirits, showing them how to build them. Some of the other cultural practices here show a faloo, a traditional meeting house. These are being renovated. There's quite a few of them now. This is where young men would gather for their offshore fishing, but they would also build fish weirs that were nearby for fish that they could then eat. So there are cultural practices associated with them where they would catch the fish, they would be able to eat them, but they would sort of pay tribute to the owners of each atch. Every atch is owned, this is the traditional name for the fish weir, are owned by someone, and they also the village chief, that they would also give fish to their village chief. So there are a number of cultural practices associated, and just a nice shot there of a traditional pathway through the jungle of Yap. So this is an illustration from an aerial photograph of a tidal flat area. So here the water would come right up to the coastline, right up to the beach. So you can see the longest one there is probably about 80 metres long. They're made of small basalt rocks. Not just small, but they could range from rocks that are about the size of a football, a basketball, through to quite big boulders. And so when the tide comes in, the fish come in. And as you can see, there's seagrass, sea meadows where fish are grazing. When the tide is falling, the fish are moving along, and that shaft that goes out from the coast, it stops fish from moving away. It directs fish into that big arrow-shaped chamber. And then you can see a smaller compartment where the smaller fish can get into. So it might take a couple of years to build, say, that big one. You can see there's 2 others, and around this point there's about 5 or 6 of these arrow-shaped ones close to the coast. This is another section of the reef flat. You can see 2 of them together, and you can see that the arrow is actually not symmetrical either side of the shaft. That's because fish come from up above, they come from where the longest part of the arrow is. And this helps direct fish into the trap with the shaft, in the trap, the compartment. So it might be passively fished, where the fish people just let the fish go in, or it could be that the fish are herded in there by Yapese people. So in our survey that we did in 2009, 2010, we documented only about 430 of the 800. And we found in the 45 we did intensive surveys about 12 different styles. So they related to where they were built, if they were close to the coast, like the ones with the middle shaft, and also the one here with the 3 together, that's close to the coast. And then the ones that didn't have so much the middle shaft, like the one over here, it's actually further out on the reef flat. I have an illustration to show you. This one here is quite an interesting one, where it's actually a fish pond, but still in the shape of an arrow, and I'll get onto that. So the fish pond is actually, there's no direction by the shaft into the trap. It just, the tide comes in, the fish come in over the wall. When the tide drops, the fish are trapped there. There's no, it's more like a weir, and the others are more like traps where the fish are directed into a trap. But we like to keep them, calling them as weirs for simplicity's sake. This is another one on the other side of that small island I showed you before. This, you can see, the long side of the arrow is this side. This is where the fish are coming from. The shaft is actually not perpendicular. it goes out at an arc. So this is dependent on the current, the tide, which way the current is coming. So this has all been sort of worked out by Yappies. So the shape and positioning of the fish weirs are influenced by the local geography, by the direction and strength of currents, by the marine ecology, by fish movement, and the ownership of the reef flat, because every bit of the reef flat, it's been parcelled up just like on land and is owned by an individual or an estate from the village. And each fish weir, each atch is owned by maybe someone else. It's quite a complicated system. So from the outcome of our work in 2010, we were told of one particular atch, how they built a small hut over the trap, over the compartment, and this would have been built high enough so high water didn't wash the fish out. And so this sort of stopped the sun from cooking the fish, also now enabled a guard to sit under shade. But the important thing about this one shows how a Yappies is opening up the atch. And this is the point, the arrow, the back of the atch, they call it. And I was told a nice saying, a terrific saying, let fish come and go to make them feel at home. So they might catch fish for 2 days when the whole thing is closed. They can still get through these openings here, either side of the shaft. But then they would open up when they don't want to catch. And so this is part of the sustainability of it. And so fish can come in, breezing around, eating, and then they can go out. They make them feel at home. So when they actually then get trapped, it's a big surprise to them. So as I said, they're actively and passively fished. This is one further away from the coast. It's built and incorporated a blue hole here. And also down the bottom, you can see how the wall, this is the wall here, a very wide base with a narrow top. At the top, the rocks are vertical. This allows the fish to come and go as well. Also, they built it like that because the water can pass through, so the water's not hitting and breaking it down. So they've studied the whole marine environment and marine ecology. They're actively fished where people are involved in herding them into the trap area to take them out. I told a really nice story of a guy behind this atch here, and he was scooping them out almost as quickly as they were coming in. This is some early photographs of active sort of herding around an atch, and then a passive sort of method where they use a weir basket to collect the fish, with the Yappies guy with his canoe. So the maritime cultural landscape, which is essentially the atch landscape of Yap, reflects a Yappies cultural identity through this harmonious and sustainable manner in which people have interacted with the natural and spiritual world. So those red dots represent about 450. Still another 200-300 to map. So you can see virtually how the whole of the island has the fish weirs and provides this cultural landscape. So this landscape can be both landscape and seascape. We're very familiar with landscapes like another Austronesian group of people, the Balinese. They manage the ecology of the rice terraces in a harmonious relationship with the natural and spiritual world. Well, Yappies and other areas in Oceania, they managed inshore fishing in a similar way, in a harmonious relationship with the natural and spiritual world. So I like to emphasize that, it's not just landscapes, but seascapes that have been very important and effectively managed. And a nice little saying I came across for another group of fish weirs off Penghu in Taiwan: the sea is their field and the fish is their crop. So atch fishing was a sustainable fishing practice using traditional ecological knowledge. Yappies people studied fish movement and spawning aggregations when locating atch on the reef flat. And atch fishing involved many customs and cultural practices. And this is just an illustration on the right here, showing the coastline and how the coastline's divided up. There's the name of the village, and there's underneath the village name is the different types of fishing that can carry out in those areas. So with the decline in fish stocks, because of unsustainable fishing, they've declared 4 marine protected areas. And this is mainly managed by the villages. It's not sort of state run, national run, it's done by the villages. So they are using traditional ecological knowledge to some extent in the management and in the construction of their MPAs. We know from scientific evidence fish stocks have fallen by 50% between 1950 and 2012. And the reasons being overfishing, also degradation of the marine ecology, the environment. The outcomes could be further decline in the marine ecology and in human health through micronutrient deficiencies. Communities, especially the island communities, Oceania, really depend on fish for a staple, also for their micronutrients. We know, this is rather a messy map from this article in Nature, but it it states that fish could fall another 20% in those equatorial areas. So to finish off, can traditional fishing practices using a traditional fish weirs help in this conservation effort and have a role in various United Nations SDGs? And I believe it can. It can inform how to catch fish sustainably and in balance and harmony with the marine ecology. Traditional ecological knowledge can inform how to conserve the marine ecology today in association with MPAs. And we know from 21st century science that there's a higher biodiversity in fish weirs. This only confirms what Indigenous people already knew, that there was a high biodiversity in those fish weirs. And there are other SDGs that where the fish weirs and the traditional practice could have applicability. I've highlighted them there, as well as in cultural tourism, where local residents control and benefit from. And lastly, Yappies, I know in Penghu and other areas, they've wanted to revive this traditional cultural practice because it helps to revive a community spirit. And we see how this is quite important at times of stress like we see now with COVID. So thank you very much.